All right, hello everyone, and welcome to this week's Coffee Kegs and Kriegsspiel. I am your non-regular host, James. Today, Marshall is taking a step back. Not that he won't do more podcasts, but he's letting the greater IKS community participate and host more often. So this week's my turn, and I'm excited to talk to you about the Kriegsspiel staff command system today. Um, Let me just give me a second. I'm going to check, make sure everything's working like it should be. I think it is. All right. So I'm sharing a map from my most recent live game this past Thursday. I ran a fictional scenario using this system, um, and so I'm just gonna talk about it, stream of consciousness kind of thing. Um, so first of all, what is the staff command system? So when I first joined the International Kriegsspiel Society, most of the games, at least live online games, are played then and now, where you'll have the umpires will have a map like this in Tabletop Simulator for the most part, and each player will have there'll be a token representing their who they are playing physically, and then they'll have a command, so a certain number of pieces that report to them. And so every turn they'll give orders verbally to the umpire, who then goes to this master map in Tabletop Simulator. Based on whatever the orders are, he'll move the pieces around, and then at the end of the turn, whatever that turn limit is, he'll take a screenshot of it. So it'll be something like that. So take a snapshot. So if that's the HQ where he's at, something like this, where you know, a 1 to 2 or half-mile radius of just what he would see, and that screenshot gets shared in his Discord text channel of what he can see, and so on. And so if you have a game with multiple players, which we normally do, each individual person is getting their own individual screenshot. And so they're, for the most part in the game, they are on their own, kind of by themselves, commanding whatever unit they have. They're part of a larger army, and they may sometimes be co-located with a commander or a sub-commander or a fellow commander, and then some of the time they're on their own. And so that's how it's played. It works out well, and it's kind of fun because the fog of war is really great. You're on your own. You'll only see so much. You don't see the whole army, not even your own whole army, much less the enemy. And so there's a lot of unknowns and much more realism that way. That's the typical way most live games are done now within the International Kriegsspiel Society. But there is a different way, which is, I would call it the more classic Kriegsspiel way, and I would also call it the staff command way. And this is how you normally would play in person, and how Kriegsspiel is played historically. Because when you're playing in person and you have physical maps and physical pieces, you can't just have a single table, single map, and then do screenshots. It doesn't really work. And so, historically, with the historical Kriegsspiel in its origins, there'd be 3 tables. So you'd have one team on one table, you'd have the umpire table, and then the other team's table. So, and that's really probably the most you could get. I guess you could have a lot more tables, but that just becomes a lot more to manage. So really, it's 3, and then you have the same thing. You'd get orders. You'd have the umpire table would make all the changes. So the umpire table is like the Bible, or what's really happening, and then what's on the team tables is kind of a simulation of it. But then basically the teams are all together, so everyone on a team can see all the pieces for that. And so they're acting more as a staff. They're not like individual commanders out on their own. And so that's what I tried out in my most recent live game. So rather than having all the players off on their own doing their own thing, everyone was part of a team. They were together the entire game, and they were making decisions as a staff, and then working together to um, to manage their army. And this has a number of pros and cons, and I wrote it down for let's see, on the Discord. I wrote it in. I think I wrote it New Empires. Yeah, I did. So I'm gonna go. I'm pulling up my list now to remind myself. Um, so what are the pros? We'll start with the pros. What are the pros of this approach? Number one, and maybe one of the larger ones, is you could have a higher player to umpire ratio. So because uh, everyone's on a team, and sometimes there's just two teams, although you could have more than one or more than two. Um, it's less people you have to interact with, and in fact, you don't actually have to interact with them at all. Normally, the traditional, I guess the normal Kriegsspiel style, you have an umpire that has to visit the player every turn cycle to both give an update on what's going on and then receive orders for what they want to happen in the next turn cycle. But when you do it this way, you don't even have to visit that often because they're getting information from the dispatches that they're receiving, which you write, but you're not doing like the verbal update as often. Although I did from time to time like to describe what was going on around them, or if they heard, um, fighting going on somewhere. So you don't have to visit them as much, and because all the players are grouped together in one channel, there's less touch points. So you can have more players per umpire than you would need in the other way. Um, it's a bit more realistic because you usually get more granular in the turn cycle. So a normal Civil War or Napoleonic battle, the turns are 15, 20, 30 minutes, maybe an hour. Um, kind of higher level that we can get through a good portion of try to get it through a few hours of the battle in a game. Um, and the limitation on that is when you do your update cycle, it takes time to go to every single player and give them their updates and get their orders. But with this format, you can do it more granular level. Um, the historical Kriegsspiel is actually a 2 minute. It's smaller scale, so units are battalions, and you do 2 minute turn cycles. So it's very granular. I didn't. I felt that's too small for me in the practice that I did. So I did 10 minutes, and that worked out well. And getting a little bit more granular, you can get more realistic in order delays and dispatch delays. Because if you're doing like a 15 or a 30-minute turn, unless the two players are really far apart from each other or the units are really far apart from each other, the time of dispatch travel versus the time of the turn is relatively small, and so basically all dispatches arrive within the next turn. But if you do 10-minute turns, there's some more granularity there. It's just more realistic. Um, let's see, what are some other pros for it? Oh, greater player flexibility. So one of the hard things about running a live game, especially like an open Saturday live game, is you have no clue how many players you're going to have. You could have 3, you could have 15. But doing it this way makes it more flexible because you can plan, if you just have two sides, I would say each staff could have up to really 5 players in a staff. So as little as 1 and as many as 5. And they'd still have a fun time. More than 5, I think, and maybe even at 5, you start getting people that just have nothing to do. But I think 5 could work. And so when you're preparing a game, it just makes it easier that way. If you have more or less than what you expected, there's flexibility in your player count and what works. Um, let's see. It's more realistic as well in that the army headquarters is usually um, kind of far removed from the battle, so they're and this is historically accurate that they'll be in some house or somewhere in the rear, receiving dispatches throughout the day, but they're not typically on the front lines or seeing the battle happen, and it's more realistic in that way. Maybe a little bit less fun that you're not seeing it in person and getting those screenshots, but more realistic anyway. Um, so your umpires will save time by not having to do screenshots as often. So as I mentioned in my practice or this play test, I did 10-minute turns, and I was able in 2.5 hour time. I was able to process almost 5 hours of the battle, um, which is really good rate. Normally, um, in other games, it's like 1 to 1, and so this was 2 times, and so really fast. The reason being is I don't have to give an update to the players unless something's going on. So I could process a 10-minute turn, move everything, do whatever combat need to be done, and maybe there's one dispatch that has to be delivered from one commander, NPC commander to the HQ. Um, but that's it. I'm not having to visit a whole bunch of players and give screenshots every turn. It's just basically whatever dispatches are going from the front line back to the HQ. You have to take time to write those and deliver those or track them. But otherwise, you can just keep processing turns until something does happen that's worth reporting. And so for a while, I was getting through 20, 30, 40 minutes at a time without really having to slow down for that reason. And in the playtest, it was just me and ARP as the umpires. So we were kind of short-handed umpire-wise. There's two of us and I don't know, 8 or 9 or 10 players. I can't remember exactly, but I was hoping to have three. It would have got even faster there if there'd been 3 people, because I was having to do most of the combat as well as handle all the blue pieces. But even then, we were still able to do it really quickly. Um, let's see what else. Oh, so I think one of the key positives of this system is that you are sitting with a group. It's both a positive and a negative. And the reason it's positive is it can be boring. If you're playing a live game, if it's, a 3 or 4 hour live game, and you're on your own, whatever command you have, you're on your own, you're never co-located with someone else. You're basically, except for the umpire coming to visit you every 15 minutes, you're just kind of sitting there. Most people aren't, twiddling their thumbs waiting. They find something to do. They keep themselves busy. But you are just alone. It's a bit quiet. It's not necessarily as social an experience. But if you do the staff command, you are with the staff the whole game, and so you're constantly talking with each other, strategizing, discussing things, and it can be a lot of fun that way. And one of the main positives. And it could also be a con. I'll get to that when I get to the cons, but that's one of the main positives. And I saw that when I ran a live game or an in-person game at Strategicon in California a couple weeks ago. We had 2 teams, and a major part of the game and the event was just the teams being able to sit together and chat, and they're constantly discussing ideas and strategies, and there's just a lot of fun in that. That I think we could have more of within our Kriegsspiel games. Let's see. Another pro is that the umpires feel like they get to play more. And what do I mean by that? So the HQ sending orders, let's say HQ sends orders to first division to advance and attack. But all the subordinates of HQ are NPC, so it's really up to the umpire to interpret the orders they're given. And so you get to, as the umpire, more than in a typical game, HQ will give the order, and then the first division is a player, and so the first division will be more specific. He'll say, I want 2nd Brigade to screen our east flank, and these 2 brigades to go here, and this brigade stay in reserve. They're a bit more specific, something like that. But because it's an NPC, the HQ sends whatever orders they give, and they may be as simple as head west and attack the enemy, and that's it. And so it's up to the umpires to interpret. Okay, what does this commander? How does he read those orders? How would he affect them? What kind of things would he do? And so it lets the umpires get to play a little bit more. You get to make your own decisions as an umpire and play the game. It's just a little bit more fun, I think, because of that. Um, Hold on, someone I think is pinging me. Oh, Red Baron asked, would the system mean that you could do more realistic aspects like supply easier? Huh. Um, I think yes. If you were tracking supply, like because you're more granular on the turn cycle, if tracking like wagon movements mattered, you would be more accurate in that way. So yes, maybe it could be. Thanks for asking, Red Baron. Let me raise your hand if you want to speak as well. I'll try to promote you. But sorry, lost my train of thought. Let me get back to what I was talking about. So those are the pros, I think. Let's talk about the cons. So why is this not as good as the other system? So I talked about being together with a team the whole game. That's good if your team works together and you have fun talking with them. If it's if it's a bunch of people you don't necessarily get along with, or maybe you don't agree with, probably realistic in that way, but maybe less fun if you're butting heads with someone the entire game, and you may prefer to just have your own command and do your own thing rather than having to convince someone you don't like to do something. Um, so it could make for an unpleasant experience if you're stuck with someone or some people that you're not getting along with. So that could be a con, and something you'd have to think about. From an umpire perspective, so there's a lot more dispatches because you're managing everything by dispatches, and tracking them is tricky. So what I did, we had these dispatch tokens. So anytime the players, staff, or sub-commanders sent a dispatch, I'd pop one of these on to track it, and then we had this note card that we'd plop next to it. And so basically I'd have to, and this is what took the longest time, is say the first division's acknowledging an order and saying he's going to advance or something, or send a report back. I'd have to type that all out here and then track each turn that moving back to HQ, and then once it arrived I'd either copy this or take a screenshot of it and share it. But when you have a lot going on, there can be a lot of dispatches to track, and so it's just a lot of work, more than normal. So you're kind of replacing some time users with that, but it's all right. It's just a con or something that's different. Crisis asks, do you find it takes more time and resolution to interpret player commands in terms of layers of NPC command versus having explicit player orders command at all levels? Yes. So, and this is both a feature and a detriment. So, the players in the traditional system, the players will usually verbally give their orders to the umpire, and so they'll say a statement of I want X to do this and Y to do that, and then because you're talking to them, the umpire can ask clarifying questions and say, oh, what do you mean this, or do you mean here, and that can help clarify a lot of confusion. This format is the players are giving orders by dispatches, and so the umpires aren't there to question it. They just see what's written. Now you can pop into their channel and say this dispatch makes no sense. Your courier or your sub commander is saying, what do you mean by this? You could do that, but really, a major part of Kriegsspiel is an exercise in writing orders, and so it's all about how good are players at writing clear orders that make sense. And so I think rather than having to clarify it, you just take the orders as they are, and if they're absolute garbage, they don't make sense, then you just do the best you can as the sub commander, or maybe the sub commander does nothing and sends a dispatch back saying, I don't know what you mean, you need to clarify. but it is harder because you can't ask clarifying question and it's not verbally, and so it relies on the players having the ability to write good orders and your ability to interpret that what it makes sense. So good question, Crisis. Thank you for that. Let me see if there's anything else in that or if I answered it. Takes more time and resolution to interpret the commands given. Yeah, so it's harder. I don't know if it takes more time. I know for ARP and I, there's a couple orders we got a few times that we scratched our heads about. Not that it took a whole lot of extra time to do. Um, and then it, you have to remember to refer back to whatever orders were given to that player. So sometimes I had to go back and find the dispatches. So maybe First Division got orders 2 hours ago to do something, and he's just now getting into the fight, and I have to remember, okay, what were his orders exactly? So I'd have to go back and find that dispatch and reread it. Um, but that wasn't too much of a time taker. Okay, let's see what else. So other cons. So some. So as I said, this system is more realistic in that your staff writing dispatches from the rear of the army. Normally, you're not going to the front line to see what's going on. And so some players may not prefer that. They may like being on the front line, getting the screenshots, seeing what's going on, having a more direct command in that way. And so, yeah, they just may not prefer that, and that would be a con for them. Um, and then the other thing, so you have more team dynamics. So your group, hopefully everyone has assigned roles, including the CIC who's in charge and making final decisions. Um, but you have group dynamics just like you would in a real life military, just like you have in real life work. You're a team of people with different ideas and different thoughts, and you've got to work together, and that's not always easy. And so, it's a real life leadership test to see how well you can get along with others, how well you can command others, and so that can be challenging. And also it can create opportunities. It create instances where maybe some players are shoved to the side. Where if you have a very assertive person who's just making all the decisions, he may overpower someone who's more quiet, and so they would have a less stellar Kriegsspiel experience because of it. They're just not able to contribute as much. So you'd have to be careful about that. Uh, I think one way you can overcome that is just making sure everyone has a distinctive role that can't be taken up by other people. So one thing I did was I had a CIC role. I had a person assigned as the map maker. So as they received dispatches, their role was to maintain a map that they shared with the team of what they thought was going on, and then assigning someone a role of dispatch writer. And I think some teams split up like which commands they wrote dispatches to. So some people like wrote to the cavalry specifically, and maybe second and first division, and the other person wrote to third and fourth division, for example. So doing things like that so that a person can't just sit there on the side and be ran over by the rest of the team. They have to contribute as part of the team, I think is good as an umpire to do, to help formulate that. Another thing you could do, which I didn't, but you could, is if you had specific channels like for each division, maybe if certain players are assigned certain divisions in terms of interfacing with them, then maybe only they can see the channel that gets the dispatches from that division, and only they can write in the channels that goes to that division. And so they have to be the one that gets it and relays it to the staff, the headquarters table or whatever, and then they have to be the one that writes it out. And so that kind of forces people to participate, and have their area where they're responsible for. Yeah, those are all the cons I'd written down. So overall, I really like the system. I think it has a lot of positives. I'm definitely going to be doing it more myself, and I think for me the main positive is really that the social experience of being able to sit with a team and basically spend the whole game together, talking things through and having fun in that way. I think there's a lot of positives in that. So I intend to do it more in my games, and I hope that we can see it more in other games within the International Kriegsspiel Society. If you have any thoughts on what I've shared, feel free to post it anywhere in the Kriegsspiel Discord. Hopefully you enjoyed watching and listening. You're also welcome to post any questions in YouTube. I'll watch that and try to answer them if there are any. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and have a lovely night or morning wherever it is you are. Let me stop streaming and hope I don't